A gavel slams down like a death sentence in the suffocating silence of a courtroom. For Judge Reginald Voss, it's just another Tuesday, another notch on his belt, another poor soul sent away. The man in the defendant's box, a black man named Darius, is just another statistic, a face he'll forget by lunch. But Voss has made a catastrophic mistake. He believes he is the master of this domain, the weaver of fates. He doesn't know that his courtroom is a crime scene, that his gavel is a weapon, and that the man he just framed is the one man who can burn his entire corrupt world to the ground. The city of Willow Ridge was a patient with a festering wound. On the surface, it gleamed with civic pride and new development. But underneath the polished veneer, a rot had set in, poisoning everything it touched. At the heart of this decay was a name whispered in fear and reverence: Dominic, the Serpent, Russo. He ran the city's criminal underworld with brutal efficiency, but his true power didn't come from the barrel of a gun. It came from the stroke of a pen and the slam of a gavel in Courtroom 4B, presided over by the Honorable Judge Reginald Voss. The FBI's Special Task Force on Organized Crime had been trying to build a case against Russo. They had informants, wiretaps, and mountains of circumstantial evidence, but every time they got close, the case would mysteriously fall apart in court. Witnesses would recant. Evidence would be deemed inadmissible on a technicality, and key players would walk free. The leak wasn't in the police department. It was higher up. It was the judge. This is where Harlan Reed came in, to the world. He was the newly appointed assistant director of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division, a man known for his sharp mind, unyielding integrity, and a stare that could make seasoned criminals confess. But to the streets of Willow Ridge, he was about to become Darius Kane, a man with no history, no connections, and a past fabricated to look just desperate enough to be the perfect prey. The operation was audacious, bordering on insane. Harlan, a man who commanded hundreds of agents, was going undercover himself. "We can't send an agent in," he'd argued in a heated briefing in Washington. "Voss and Russo's network is too deep. They can spot a cop a mile away. They need to believe they've found a random, powerless victim. It has to be someone they won't even think to look at twice. It has to be me." Harlan lived as Darius. He let his hair grow out, grew a scruffy beard, and traded his tailored suits for worn jeans and faded t-shirts. He worked odd jobs for cash, unloading trucks at the docks, washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner. He lived in a rundown apartment in the city's most neglected district, a place the city tried to forget. He was a ghost, a nobody. He learned the rhythms of the street, the language of the desperate. He saw firsthand how the law was applied differently on this side of the city. He watched officers Blaine Hartley and Trent Whitaker, two patrolmen known to be in Voss's pocket, shake down local business owners and harass kids on the street with impunity. They were the judge's collectors, his street-level enforcers. The plan was simple: get arrested. It had to be Hartley and Whitaker, and it had to be for a crime serious enough to land him directly in Voss's court without the possibility of a plea bargain. The moment came on a damp, chilly evening. Harlan was walking home from a shift, the meager cash he'd earned tucked into his pocket. A black and white cruiser screeched to a halt beside him, its lights painting the alley walls in strobing flashes of red and blue. Hartley and Whitaker stepped out, their faces set in smug masks of authority. Well, what do we have here?" Hartley sneered, his eyes raking over Harlan. "Walking a little fast there, buddy. You got somewhere to be?" Harlan stayed in character, his shoulders slumping. "Just heading home, officers." "Now let's see some ID," Whitaker demanded, his hand resting on his sidearm. Harlan produced the fake driver's license for Darius Kane. Whitaker snatched it. "Darius Kane, you're a long way from nowhere, Darius." He handed it to Hartley, who made a show of examining it under the flashlight. "What's in the bag?" Hartley asked, nodding toward the small backpack Harlan was carrying. "Just my work clothes." "We'll be the judge of that," Hartley said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He ripped the bag from Harlan's shoulder and dumped its contents onto the wet pavement. A change of clothes, a half-eaten sandwich, a paperback book, and a small clear baggie containing a white, powdery substance. Harlan's internal clock began to tick. The bait was planted. He looked at the baggie with practiced confusion and fear. "What is that? That's not mine. I've never seen that before." Whitaker laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That's what they all say. Looks like about 2 ounces of premium-grade trouble to me, Blaine." "My thoughts exactly," Hartley agreed, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Darius Kane, you are under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." The cold steel clamped around Harlan's wrists. He didn't resist. He kept his eyes down, projecting the image of a terrified, defeated man. As they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, he caught a glimpse of Hartley's phone. The officer was sending a text message, the screen's glow illuminating his triumphant smirk. The message was being sent to a burner phone, but Harlan knew its ultimate destination. It was a signal to the whole corrupt machine. The gears were now turning. The bait had been taken, and he was being dragged into the heart of the beast's lair. The central booking precinct was a cacophony of human misery. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, disinfectant, and despair. For Harlan Reed, who had overseen operations that dismantled international crime syndicates, this was a different kind of front line. Here the enemy wasn't a cartel boss or a foreign spy. It was the slow, grinding indifference of a system designed to break you. As Darius Kane, he was processed like cattle. His fingerprints were taken, his photos snapped, his worn-out belt and shoelaces confiscated. He was stripped of his identity and given a number. Every interaction was designed to diminish him, to make him feel small and powerless. The officers behind the desk were dismissive. The guards were hostile, and the other men in the holding cell were a mixture of hardened criminals and terrified first-timers. Harlan, with his calm and watchful demeanor, fit somewhere in the middle. He observed everything, cataloging the cracks in the system, the casual cruelty, the shortcuts that were the lifeblood of corruption. After a long, sleepless night on a cold steel bench, he was brought for his arraignment. He was shuffled into a small, windowless room to meet his court-appointed lawyer. A tired-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes and a stack of files that seemed permanently attached to her hip entered and sat down opposite him. "Lena Harlow," she said, her voice weary but professional. "I'm your public defender. I've got about 10 minutes before they call your name, so let's make this quick. You're Darius Kane, picked up for possession with intent. 2 ounces of cocaine. Officers Hartley and Whitaker. They're claiming it was in plain view in your bag. This is a serious charge. Given the weight, you're looking at mandatory minimums. The DA is not going to be lenient." She spoke in a rapid-fire monotone, the sound of someone who had given this same speech 100 times to 100 different men. Harlan looked at her, truly looked at her. He could see the spark of a fighter buried under layers of exhaustion and cynicism. "It wasn't mine," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "They planted it." Lena let out a sigh, a sound heavy with disappointment. "Mr. Kane, everyone says that. I have 23 active cases right now. I need something more to work with than they planted it. Did they have cause to stop you? Did you say anything incriminating? They stopped me for walking too fast, Harlan replied evenly. I said nothing. Something in his tone, a lack of the usual panic or defensive anger, made Lena pause. She looked at his file again, then back at him. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a stillness that was out of place. Hartley and Whitaker, she muttered to herself. They have a reputation. Their reports are always a little too perfect. She sighed again. Look, the bail hearing is next. The judge will be Reginald Voss. He's tough, especially on drug charges. Don't say anything unless I tell you to. Just nod and look respectful. Our goal today is just to get through this. We'll talk more later. Shackled to a line of other men in orange jumpsuits, Harlan was led into courtroom 4B. It was an old, wood-paneled room that tried to project an aura of solemnity and justice, but the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light and the faint scent of decay told a different story. And then he saw him. Judge Reginald Voss sat elevated on the bench, a black robe draped over his portly frame. He had a florid face, small, shrewd eyes, and a mouth that was permanently downturned in a look of stern disapproval. He moved with an air of absolute, unchallengeable authority. This was the man who held the city's fate in his hands. As the bail hearing for Darius Kane began, Voss barely glanced at the file. The prosecutor quickly recited the charges. Mr. Kane, Voss said, his voice dripping with condescension as he finally looked down at Harlan. Possession with intent to distribute, poisoning our streets. You people come into this city and... He stopped himself, catching the slightest flicker of a warning glance from a court clerk. This court has zero tolerance for this kind of filth. Lena Harlow stood. Your Honor, my client has no prior convictions. He has ties to the community, tenuous though they may be, and is not a flight risk. We request bail be set at a reasonable amount. Voss scoffed, a small, dismissive sound. No priors that we know of. These transient individuals are a plague. They drift in, commit their crimes, and drift out. Reasonable bail? The only reasonable thing to do is ensure Mr. Kane remains where he can do no more harm. He looked directly at Harlan, his eyes cold and devoid of empathy. Bail is denied. Remand to custody until trial. He banged his gavel, the sound echoing the finality of a slamming cell door. Next case. As Harlan was led away by the bailiffs, his eyes met Voss's for a fleeting second. Harlan showed nothing, his face a mask of resignation. But inside, a cold fire was burning. Voss hadn't just denied him bail, he had revealed his hand, the use of you people, the immediate assumption of guilt, the theatrical contempt. It was all part of the show. This wasn't justice, it was a performance. And Voss was the star. Back in the holding cell, the weight of the system felt real, suffocating. Harlan knew his team was monitoring from a distance, that this was all part of the plan. But for the men around him, this was not a plan. This was their life. He was inside the jaws of the machine, and he could feel them beginning to grind. The Willow Ridge County Detention Center was a world unto itself, a concrete and steel ecosystem that operated on its own brutal set of rules. For Harlan, it was the perfect listening post. Stripped of his rank and authority, he was just another inmate, invisible and underestimated. And in a place like this, being invisible was a superpower. He spent his days in a state of heightened awareness, his FBI training kicking into overdrive. He was a sponge, absorbing the prison's rhythm, its power dynamics, its currency of fear and favor. He listened to the guards' casual conversations, noting their biases and their blind spots. He watched the inmates, deciphering the coded language and silent signals that passed between them. His target was information on the pipeline between the street and the courtroom. He needed to find the link, the whispers that connected Russo, Voss, and the beat cops like Hartley and Whitaker. He found it in the unlikeliest of places, the prison library. It was a small, dusty room filled with tattered paperbacks, a sanctuary for those seeking a temporary escape. An old inmate named Otis Gramps Hargrove ran the place. Gramps had been inside for a long time, a lifer who had seen it all. He was quiet, observant, and respected by every faction in the jail. Harlan started spending his allotted time in the library, not just to read, but to talk to Gramps. He didn't push or pry. He asked about books, about life inside, and he listened. Gramps, in turn, seemed to recognize something different in Darius. He saw a man who wasn't broken by the system but was studying it. One afternoon, as Harlan was shelving books, he mentioned his case. "Got picked up by Hartley and Whitaker," he said casually. "Planted a bag on me." Gramps didn't even look up from the book he was repairing. "The welcoming committee," he rasped, his voice low. "That's what we call them. They bring fresh meat for the judge's grinder." "Voss?" Harlan asked, keeping his tone neutral. "There's only one judge that matters for cases like ours," Gramps said, finally meeting Harlan's gaze. His old eyes were sharp and knowing. "Voss runs his courtroom like a factory. Cops bring him the parts. He assembles the convictions, and the product gets shipped out here. Everybody gets what they want." "What does Voss want?" Gramps gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "What do all powerful men want? More power and money. You don't get a house on Silver Lake and send your kids to Ivy League schools on a judge's salary, not without a little help from your friends." "Friends like Dominic Russo," Harlan ventured. The name, a carefully placed stone, dropped into a still pond. Gramps' demeanor changed instantly. The friendly old librarian vanished, replaced by a weary inmate. "You don't say that name in here. Not unless you want to find a shiv in your ribs. Some walls have ears, and some of those ears report directly to the Serpent." The conversation was over, but Harlan had what he needed. Confirmation. The connection was real, and it was common knowledge within the prison walls. Voss wasn't just a racist judge. He was a key cog in Russo's criminal enterprise. He kept the competition off the streets by fast-tracking convictions for rival dealers while ensuring Russo's own men got a pass. The frame-ups weren't random acts of prejudice. They were strategic moves to fill a quota and maintain a profitable partnership. Meanwhile, on the outside, Lena Harlow was finding her own reasons for suspicion. The perfect police report from Hartley and Whitaker was starting to unravel under her scrutiny. The dashcam footage from their cruiser had a convenient and inexplicable gap right around the time of the stop. The chain of custody for the evidence bag was sloppy, with a signature that was barely legible. Driven by a gut feeling she couldn't shake, she started digging into old case files involving the two officers. A pattern emerged. Dozens of arrests, all with similar fact patterns. A lone minority defendant, a traffic stop for a minor infraction, and the discovery of a significant quantity of drugs. And nearly every single one of those cases had been funneled into Judge Voss's courtroom and ended in a swift conviction. She scheduled another meeting with Darius in the jail's visitation room. "You were right," she said, her voice a low, intense whisper as she leaned over the table. "This is bigger than just you. Hartley, Whitaker, and Voss. It's a system. I found at least 15 cases just like yours, but it's all circumstantial. It's a pattern of behavior, not hard proof of a conspiracy. What about the dash cam? Harlan asked. The official report says equipment malfunction. It's a dead end, she said, frustration clear in her voice. They're covering for each other. The DA's office is accepting their reports without question. To win this, I need more than a pattern. I need something that blows this whole thing wide open. Harlan looked at her, his expression unreadable. He knew his team was gathering that proof, compiling financial records and tracking communications between Voss and Russo's lieutenants. But Lena didn't know that. She was fighting this battle alone, armed with nothing but her intellect and a growing sense of outrage. Just keep digging, Harlan told her. Question everything at trial. Make them lie on the stand. Make them contradict themselves. Every lie they tell is a thread. Pull on enough of them, and the whole tapestry will unravel. Lena looked at her client, a man the world had labeled a drug dealer, but he spoke with the clarity and confidence of a strategist. For the first time, a flicker of hope ignited within her. This wasn't just another lost cause. This was a fight. And for some reason, she felt like the man sitting across from her was ready for it. The day of the trial arrived with a heavy, oppressive stillness. Courtroom 4B was Judge Voss's kingdom, and from the moment he swept in, his black robes billowing behind him, he made it clear who was in charge. He greeted the prosecuting attorney, a slick, ambitious man named Preston Gale, with a warm nod, and shot Lena Harlow a look of undisguised irritation. The jury selection was a masterclass in judicial manipulation. Voss, with subtle cues and leading questions, steered the selection toward a panel that was predominantly white, older, and inclined to trust law enforcement without question. Lena fought valiantly, using her limited challenges to weed out the most obvious biases, but she knew she was starting the trial on the back foot. Prosecutor Gale began his opening statement with theatrical confidence. He painted Darius Kane as a predator, a transient criminal who came to Willow Ridge to peddle poison. He held up the evidence bag of cocaine, calling it a one-way ticket to misery and death, and lauded officers Hartley and Whitaker as heroes protecting the community. When it was Lena's turn, her approach was starkly different. This case isn't about drugs, she began, her voice clear and steady, addressing the jury directly. It's about the abuse of power. It's about a story crafted by two police officers that is too neat, too convenient, and too full of holes. The evidence will show you that my client, Darius Kane, is not a drug dealer. He is a victim. Voss watched her, his fingers steepled, a look of profound boredom on his face. The prosecution's case was simple and, on the surface, devastating. Officer Blaine Hartley took the stand first. He was calm, professional, and radiated an aura of unimpeachable authority. He recounted the night of the arrest, describing how he and his partner had observed the defendant acting suspiciously and how a routine stop had led to the discovery of the narcotics. His testimony was a perfect recitation of his police report. Then came Lena's cross-examination. Officer Hartley, she began, approaching the witness stand. You stated you stopped my client for walking too fast. Can you please tell the court what the legal definition of walking too fast is? Gale shot to his feet. Objection, relevance. Sustained. Voss grunted without even looking at Lena. Lena pivoted. Officer, your report mentions a gap in your dash cam recording due to an equipment malfunction. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. The older units can be unreliable, Hartley said smoothly. How convenient, Lena murmured, earning a sharp glare from the judge. In your experience, officer, how often do these malfunctions occur? It happens from time to time. And did this malfunction happen before or after you claimed to have found the drugs? Hartley hesitated for a fraction of a second. I believe it was around the same time. So the single most crucial piece of objective evidence in this entire case is missing because of a perfectly timed technical glitch. Lena pressed. Objection. Argumentative, Gale shouted. Sustained. Miss Harlow, move on or I will hold you in contempt, Voss barked. The pattern continued with Officer Whitaker. He corroborated Hartley's story perfectly, too perfectly. They used the same phrases, the same turns of speech, as if they had rehearsed from a script. Lena poked and prodded, trying to find a crack in their story. But with Voss blocking her at every turn, it was like trying to punch through a brick wall. Every objection from the prosecution was sustained. Every one of hers was overruled with a contemptuous wave of the hand. Harlan watched from the defendant's table, a silent, impassive observer. He was playing his part, looking downtrodden and hopeless, but inside, he was a grandmaster watching a chess game, anticipating every move. He saw the jury, their faces already hardening against him. He saw Lena fighting with everything she had against a rigged game. And he saw Voss, the smug puppet master, pulling all the strings. During a recess, Lena sat beside him, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm sorry, Darius, she whispered, her voice strained. He's not letting me lay a glove on them. The jury sees me as an obstructionist and them as heroes. We're losing. Harlan looked at her, his eyes holding a depth she couldn't comprehend. You're doing exactly what you need to do, he said, his voice a low rumble. You're showing them the system. You're putting the corruption on the record. Don't stop fighting. His words, his unnerving calm, gave her a small jolt of renewed energy. She didn't understand this man, but she was starting to believe in him. The final act of the prosecution's case was the testimony of a forensic expert who confirmed the substance was cocaine and the amount was consistent with intent to distribute. It was a clinical, factual presentation that seemed to seal Darius Kane's fate. As the prosecution rested its case, a palpable sense of finality settled over the courtroom. Gale looked at the jury with a triumphant smile. Judge Voss looked at his watch, eager to wrap things up. The system was working exactly as it was designed to. The frame was set. The evidence was presented, and the judge was ready to hammer the final nail in the coffin. Everyone in the room believed the outcome was a foregone conclusion. They were all wrong. The defense's case was painfully short. With no witnesses and no physical evidence to present, all Lena Harlow had was the testimony of her client. Against her better judgment, but at his insistence, she called Darius Kane to the stand. Harlan walked to the witness box with a steady, deliberate gait that seemed at odds with his supposed station in life. He took the oath, his voice ringing with a surprising clarity in the hushed courtroom. Lena led him through his testimony. He calmly and simply recounted his version of events, that he was walking home, that he was stopped without cause, and that the drugs were planted on him by the officers. He never raised his voice, never wavered in his account. Then came the cross-examination. Prosecutor Gale approached him like a wolf circling its prey. He sneered. He mocked. He twisted Harlan's words. Mr. Kane, Gale began, dripping with sarcasm. You're asking this jury to believe that two decorated police officers, two public servants, risked their careers and their freedom to frame a man with no job, no money, and no importance. What possible motive would they have? You'd have to ask them, Harlan replied, his gaze unwavering. Oh, I will. I'll ask the jury to consider their sterling records against yours, Mr. Kane, or rather, the lack of one. It's quite convenient, isn't it, that you just appeared in Willow Ridge? No history, no family, no connections, almost as if you have something to hide. Gale hammered away, but Harlan remained a rock. He answered every question with simple, direct honesty. His composure seemed to frustrate the prosecutor, who grew more and more aggressive. But in the end, it didn't matter. The jury had already made up their minds. After closing arguments, where Gale painted Harlan as a menace and Lena made a passionate plea for them to see the reasonable doubt she saw so clearly, the jury filed out. They returned quickly. The speed of the verdict was a brutal omen. The foreman, a stern-faced man who had avoided eye contact with Harlan throughout the trial, handed a slip of paper to the bailiff. The bailiff passed it to Voss. Voss read the verdict to himself first, and the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. He cleared his throat. On the charge of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, we the jury find the defendant, Darius Kane. He paused for dramatic effect. Guilty. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through one side of the courtroom. Lena Harlow slumped in her chair, the blow landing with physical force. She reached over and put a hand on Harlan's arm. A gesture of comfort. He, however, remained perfectly still. He simply watched Judge Voss, his expression unreadable. Sentencing will take place immediately, Voss announced, eager to close the book on this case. Mr. Kane, please rise. Harlan stood, his movements fluid and unhurried. Voss leaned forward, relishing his moment of victory. He removed his glasses and looked down at Harlan with a look of utter contempt. Darius Kane, this court has found you guilty of peddling filth on the streets of our fine city. Your crime is not merely a legal transgression. It is a moral one. You and people like you are a cancer that we must cut out. You prey on the weak and contribute nothing to society. You are, in short, a liar, a criminal, and a parasite. The judge's voice boomed with self-righteous fury. He was no longer a judge. He was a priest condemning a sinner. Therefore, it is the sentence of this court, he continued, that you will serve no less than 15 years in a state penitentiary with no possibility of parole for the first 10. This should serve as a message. It was at that moment that Harlan chose to act. Your Honor, he said, his voice cutting through Voss's tirade. It wasn't loud, but it had a quality of command that made everyone in the room, including the judge, fall silent. Voss stared, stunned by the interruption, by the avaba. The defendant will be silent. You have nothing more to say. On the contrary, Your Honor, Harlan said, his voice gaining strength. I believe I am entitled to make a statement before sentencing is finalized, and I have quite a lot to say. Lena Harlow looked at her client in a panic. What was he doing? He was only making things worse. She tried to pull him back, to whisper for him to stop, but he gently shook his head. Voss, intrigued and arrogant, leaned back in his chair. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. Very well, Mr. Kane. Let's hear it. Let's hear the pathetic excuses of a common criminal. The floor is yours. Amuse us. He gestured magnanimously. In his mind, he was giving the condemned man one last bit of rope to hang himself with. Harlan Reed looked around the courtroom. He met the eyes of the jury, the prosecutor, and his own bewildered lawyer. Then his gaze settled on Judge Reginald Voss, a predator locking eyes with its prey. The performance was over. The investigation was about to reach its stunning conclusion. The air in the courtroom crackled with a tension that no one could explain. They were all standing on the edge of a precipice, about to witness a fall they could never have imagined. Thank you, Your Honor, Harlan began, his voice now devoid of the meekness he had feigned. It was a new voice, crisp, articulate, and imbued with an authority that seemed to come from a place far beyond the confines of a defendant's box. The entire courtroom leaned in, captivated by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "For the past 3 days," he continued, turning slightly to address the jury, "you have listened to a story, a well-rehearsed narrative about a man named Darius Kane, a supposed drug dealer. You heard the testimony of Officers Hartley and Whitaker, who painted themselves as vigilant protectors of this city." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. But as Miss Harlow so eloquently argued, a story is all it is, and it's a story full of holes. Let's talk about that gap in the dashcam footage, for instance. An equipment malfunction, Officer Hartley called it. Harlan's eyes found Officer Hartley, who was standing near the prosecution's table looking smug. "The equipment didn't malfunction, Officer Hartley. It was manually deactivated and reactivated. Just long enough for Officer Whitaker to exit the vehicle, approach my side, and place the bag of narcotics, which had been in the cruiser's glove compartment since the beginning of your shift, into my backpack." Hartley's face went pale. Prosecutor Gale shot to his feet. "Objection! The defendant is making wild, unsubstantiated claims." "I'm just getting started," Harlan said, his voice cutting through the objection like a scalpel. He turned his attention to the judge. "This frame-up, Your Honor, was efficient. Almost as efficient as the other identical cases prosecuted in this very courtroom, all involving minority defendants, all arrested by the same 2 officers, and all resulting in maximum sentences delivered by you." Voss's face, once florid and arrogant, was now a mask of disbelief and rage. "Bailiff, restrain the defendant. His outburst is over." But the 2 bailiffs flanking Harlan hesitated, mesmerized by the scene unfolding. "I don't think you want to do that," Harlan said calmly. He looked past Voss toward the main doors at the back of the courtroom. "Because this isn't an outburst, it's a debriefing." His eyes shifted to Gale. "And you, Mr. Gale? You were so curious about my motive, about why 2 decorated officers would frame an unimportant man. They did it because they were ordered to, just as you are ordered to prosecute certain cases with extreme prejudice while letting others slide." He then looked directly at Judge Voss, his voice dropping to a steely, accusatory tone. "They do it for the same reason you do, Your Honor. For the money. For the monthly payments that are funneled from the accounts of Dominic Russo through 3 shell corporations and into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, account number 734-9B-41. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Lena Harlow stared at her client, her mind reeling. How could he possibly know these things? Judge Voss slammed his gavel repeatedly, the sound now frantic and powerless. "Contempt! Contempt of court! I order you to be silent. This is a circus." "No, Your Honor," Harlan said, his voice rising to fill the chamber. "This is a federal sting operation, and you are its primary target." He reached into the pocket of his orange jumpsuit, an act that should have been impossible, and pulled out a small, flat object. He held it up. It was a badge, an FBI badge. "My name is not Darius Kane," he declared, his voice resonating with the full force of the United States government. "I am Assistant Director Harlan Reed of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A dozen agents in dark blue vests, emblazoned with FBI, swarmed into the room, their movements precise and overwhelming. Leading them was a sharp-eyed woman who looked directly at Harlan. "Director Reed," Agent Valeria Cruz said, her voice crisp. "The perimeter is secure." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters in the gallery scrambled for their phones. The jury stared in stunned silence, their mouths agape. Officers Hartley and Whitaker were frozen in place, their faces a portrait of pure terror as two agents moved to apprehend them. Prosecutor Gale staggered backward, collapsing into his chair as if his legs had given out. But Harlan Reed had eyes for only one man. He looked at Judge Reginald Voss, who was half standing, his face ashen, his gavel fallen from his trembling hand. The black robe that had been a symbol of his power now looked like a funeral shroud. "Reginald Voss," Harlan said, his voice cold and final. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." Two federal agents ascended the steps to the bench, the sacred space of the court now a crime scene. They cuffed the sputtering, incoherent judge who just moments before had been the most powerful man in the room. Harlan Reed stood tall in his orange jumpsuit, a symbol of the very system the judge had corrupted. He had walked into the lion's den disguised as a lamb, and he had brought the whole jungle down with him. The immediate aftermath of the reveal was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. As Judge Voss, speechless and shaking, was led away in handcuffs from his own bench, the sanctity of Courtroom 4B was irrevocably shattered. What was once a hall of justice had been exposed as a criminal's boardroom, and its CEO was now in federal custody. Officers Hartley and Whitaker offered no resistance. The color had drained from their faces, replaced by the sick gray pallor of men who knew their lives were over. As they were read their rights, their eyes darted around frantically, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Their world of petty tyranny and guaranteed impunity had evaporated. Lena Harlow remained frozen in her seat beside the man she had known as Darius Kane. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, shock, and a dawning, brilliant sense of vindication. Every instinct she'd had about this case, every suspicion she'd harbored about the corruption in the system was not just true. It was the subject of the highest level federal investigation. Harlan, Director Reed, turned to her. The hardened mask of the undercover operative softened for a moment, and she saw the man beneath. "Miss Harlow," he said, his voice now filled with a deep, genuine respect. "I apologize for the deception. It was a necessary part of the operation. You should know you're one of the finest public defenders I have ever had the privilege of observing. You fought for me when you had every reason not to. You upheld your oath, even in a court where it was meaningless." Lena could only stammer. I don't understand. You let them convict you." "We had to," Agent Cruz explained, stepping forward. A conviction and sentencing by Judge Voss was the final, undeniable act that tied the entire conspiracy together. It was the keystone. By framing Director Reed, he sealed his own fate. The full scope of the operation, codenamed Shattered Hammer, was revealed over the next few hours. While Harlan had been on the inside, his team had been working tirelessly on the outside. They had correlated his inside information with financial forensics, witness protection details, and advanced surveillance. They had built an ironclad case not just against the judge and his pet officers, but against the entire network. As Voss was being processed at the federal building, other FBI teams were executing coordinated raids across Willow Ridge. Dominic the Serpent. Russo was apprehended at his lavish estate, caught completely by surprise. His top lieutenants, several city officials on his payroll, and a handful of other corrupt police officers were rounded up simultaneously. The rot Harlan had felt in the city wasn't just being treated, it was being surgically removed. News cameras flocked to the courthouse, their broadcasts going national. The story was sensational. A sitting judge arrested in his own courtroom by an undercover FBI director he had just sentenced to prison. It was a tale of hubris and justice so perfect it seemed scripted. For Harlan, The work was far from over. He was taken to a secure location where he finally shed the identity of Darius Kane. After a hot shower and a change into a crisp suit, he looked like himself again, but his eyes held the weight of what he had experienced. He had seen the justice system from the bottom up, and the sight was uglier than he could have imagined. He personally oversaw the initial interrogations. Hartley and Whitaker folded quickly, each one trying to betray the other to get a better deal. They confessed everything: the frame-ups, the kickbacks, the orders they took from Voss. Voss himself was a different story. He blustered and threatened, citing judicial immunity and accusing the FBI of a vendetta. But when Harlan walked into the interrogation room and laid out a series of satellite photos showing Voss meeting with Russo on his private yacht, followed by bank statements from his offshore account with perfectly matching deposit dates, the judge's facade crumbled. He sat in stunned, defeated silence. The master of the universe was just a common criminal, caught in an airtight trap. The reckoning had come to Willow Ridge. The fall of Voss and Russo sent shockwaves through the city's political and legal establishments. It was a brutal, necessary purge, a cleansing fire that would allow for the possibility of true justice to finally take root. In the months that followed, the city of Willow Ridge underwent a painful but necessary transformation. The federal trials of Reginald Voss, Dominic, Russo, and their co-conspirators became a public spectacle, laying bare the depth of the corruption that had plagued the city. Harlan Reed did not testify in person, but provided a detailed deposition that served as the backbone of the prosecution's case. The evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the confessions of Hartley and Whitaker, who both took plea deals for reduced sentences, and the testimony of dozens of other individuals who had been caught in Voss's web painted a damning picture. The former judge was a shadow of his former self. Stripped of his robes and his power, Reginald Voss was just another paunchy, middle-aged man in a suit, his arrogance replaced by a desperate, palpable fear. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in federal prison, a fate he had so callously made it out to countless innocent men. The irony was lost on no one. Dominic Russo, the Serpent, was also convicted. His criminal empire dismantled for good. He would spend the rest of his days in a supermax facility, his power confined to a 6 by 9 foot cell. But for Harlan Reed, the victory was about more than just putting bad men behind bars. It was about repairing the damage they had done. He spearheaded a joint task force with the Department of Justice to review every single case that had passed through Voss's courtroom. It was a monumental undertaking. One by one, wrongful convictions were overturned. Men who had lost years of their lives to Voss's corrupt grinder were exonerated and released. Families were reunited. Lives were, piece by piece, put back together. Otis Gramps Hargrove, the old prison librarian who had first confirmed Harlan's suspicions, was among those whose sentences were reviewed and eventually commuted. Lena Harlow became a local hero. Her tireless defense of Darius Kane was lauded as a testament to the principles of public defense. She was offered a senior position in a newly reformed public defender's office, with the resources and staff to ensure that no one would face a rigged system alone ever again. She accepted, determined to be part of the solution. One crisp autumn evening, months after the trial, Harlan returned to Willow Ridge, not as an undercover operative, but as the assistant director of the FBI. He met Lena at a small cafe overlooking the city skyline. "Look at it," Lena said, gesturing to the city lights. "It feels different now, cleaner, more hopeful." "Justice has a way of doing that," Harlan replied, a faint smile on his face. "It's a long road, but it's worth it." None of this would have been possible without people like you, Lena. People who keep fighting, even when the fight seems lost. I had a feeling about you, you know, she admitted with a laugh. I told my colleagues I had a client who was either completely innocent or the most convincing sociopath I'd ever met. I'm glad it was the former. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two warriors who had fought on the same side of a secret war. Harlan had gone into the darkness to expose it, but it was people like Lena, working every day in the trenches, who would have to keep the light on. As he prepared to leave, Harlan looked out at the city once more. His work in Willow Ridge was done. The wound had been cleansed. The patient was healing. It was a stark reminder that sometimes, to fix a broken system, you have to be willing to break it wide open. And sometimes, the most powerful man in the room isn't the one in the judge's robes, but the one in the defendant's box, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver a verdict of his own. Time passed. The seasons in Willow Ridge turned, washing the city with rain and sun, and with them washing away the most visible stains of its corrupt past. The sensational trials of Judge Voss and the Russo syndicate faded from the national headlines into local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to new recruits at the police academy and a case study for law students. But for the people whose lives were directly touched by the conspiracy, the changes were not legendary. They were real, tangible, and woven into the fabric of their daily existence. Lena Harlow now ran the Willow Ridge Public Defender's office. The cramped, underfunded warren of cubicles had been replaced by a modern, spacious office in a new municipal building. The change was more than cosmetic. Her budget had been tripled by a reform-minded city council, allowing her to hire bright, dedicated young lawyers, investigators, and social workers. The office, once a place of managed despair, now hummed with a vibrant, determined energy. One afternoon, she watched a young lawyer from her team, Sophia Reyes, return from court, her face glowing with triumph. "We won," Sophia announced to the office, a round of applause breaking out. Motion to suppress granted. The judge found the traffic stop had no probable cause. Case dismissed. Lena smiled. The judge in that courtroom was a new appointee, a stern but scrupulously fair woman who followed the letter of the law. A motion like that would have been laughed out of Voss's court. Today it was the standard. The system was slowly, painstakingly healing itself. "That's great work, Sophia," Lena said. "What did I tell you? You attack the procedure. You make them justify every step. It's just, I can't imagine what it was like for you," Sophia said, her voice full of awe, "arguing in front of him." "It was a different world," Lena admitted, a distant look in her eyes. "But it's a world that doesn't exist anymore. Let's make sure it never comes back." Miles away, in the desolate landscape of ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison, former Judge Reginald Voss was living in that different world. Here, there were no black robes, no elevated bench, no symbols of power. There was only a concrete box and the crushing weight of endless identical days. His name was gone, replaced by inmate number 7928-DA12. He was no longer a weaver of fates. He was a ghost in the machine he had once so gleefully operated. The other inmates, a collection of the nation's most dangerous criminals, regarded him with a particular kind of contempt. He wasn't a gangster or a kingpin. He was a hypocrite, a man who had wielded the law like a weapon only to be felled by it himself. One day in the prison yard, during his 1 hour of allotted recreation, a wiry inmate with cold, dead eyes approached him. "Voss, right?" the inmate hissed, his voice a low threat. Voss, whose spirit had been eroded to a nub of perpetual fear, flinched. I don't know you. You should. You sent me up for a possession charge. Cops were Hartley and Whitaker. The inmate's lips twisted into a cruel smile. Funny how things work out. I get out on that appeal your FBI friend started, but you're never leaving. Every day you're in here, I want you to remember the faces of the men you sent here, because now you're just one of us. The inmate walked away, leaving Voss trembling, not from the threat of violence, but from the chillingly perfect karma of his new reality. He was trapped in the very hell he had created for others, stripped of his name, his power, and his future. Back in Washington, D.C., in his quiet, orderly office at FBI headquarters, Assistant Director Harlan Reed reviewed the latest crime statistics from Willow Ridge. Violent crime was down. Public trust in law enforcement was up for the first time in a long while. The reforms were holding. Operation Shattered Hammer had become a model for combating systemic corruption. Harlan had been promoted, given more oversight, and was now tasked with creating similar internal affairs units in other troubled cities. The work was demanding, bureaucratic, and a world away from the grit of his undercover assignment. Yet he found a deep satisfaction in it. Pinned to a corkboard behind his desk, amidst charts and official memos, was a small newspaper clipping from the Willow Ridge Gazette. It was a photo of Lena Harlow cutting the ribbon on her new office. She had sent it to him with a simple, handwritten note. "Look what you started." He sometimes thought about Darius Kane, the ghost he had been. He remembered the cold of the cell, the taste of prison food, the suffocating feeling of powerlessness. It was a scar on his soul, a memory he would carry forever. But it was also his greatest strength. It gave him a perspective that no other director in the Bureau possessed. He knew what the system felt like from the bottom, and he would spend the rest of his career fighting to fix it from the top. The city of Willow Ridge was healing, but the scars remained. They were a reminder of how easily justice could be perverted, but also a testament to the fact that no system is so broken that it cannot be reclaimed by the brave and the just. The fall of one corrupt judge had not solved all the world's problems, but for one city, it had allowed a new dawn to break. The story of Harlan Reed and Judge Voss is a powerful reminder that the scales of justice can be tipped by corruption, but they can always be set right by courage and truth. It shows that no one is above the law, and that integrity can be found in the most unexpected places, from the highest ranks of the FBI to the overworked office of a public defender. Karma in this story wasn't just a concept. It was a federal task force, and its arrival was devastating for those who thought they were untouchable. If this story of justice served and corruption crushed resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see that the good guys can still win. And subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of karma and justice in action. Let us know in the comments what you thought about Director Reed's audacious,